Hey guys, John Paulamy here, Actionable Intelligence. Today is Sunday, May 24th, 2020, and this is the weekly market update. So, before we get started, let me just say that this week's reality check is going to be very controversial. If you are somebody that is easily triggered, you probably should just skip through. But having given that warning, we're going to get into it. So, what you see here is a N95 face mask. I saw this image on Twitter. I thought it was interesting to talk about. It says on wise guy put on there that the words, "This is a mind control device." So, since the beginning of this whole COVID-19 crisis, I've kind of wondered what, we were told originally. We had this big outbreak in China. China was shutting everything down. It was kind of like a respiratory disease, kind of similar to the flu, but a little worse. So you knew it was going to spread. So it eventually makes it around the world, if you want to call that a pandemic. But the data and news on this thing kept changing. And, as more data came out and more accuracy in testing came out, because this is new, people didn't know what's going on, so I kind of see the panic. But then it seemed like the news media really hyped this thing up for some reason. And the reason why I bring this up is because we now have better data. We actually are doing a lot more testing. We have a lot more and better information and statistics. I would allege that a lot of the statistics around the deaths attributable to this disease are inflated due to commingling with, for example, say that you are 80 years old and you have multiple issues, Alzheimer's, diabetes, heart disease, and you happen to die with COVID. You are put on the death certificate in many cases that you died of COVID, so which isn't necessarily accurate. But I'm not going to get into that. I think statisticians and medical history people will get into that over the years and get to the real bottom line. What I want to get to is we've had previous new diseases, and one of them was H1N1 back in 2009. And I will show later in the slides how the number of worldwide deaths was similar, around the same range of what we're seeing with COVID-19. But yet, we didn't shut the whole world economy down. We didn't panic. We didn't have these reaches for power by certain politicians. And so I'm wondering what's different. So we'll get into that a little bit. One of the things that I've been talking about, and one of the things that concerns me about this whole thing, is not necessarily the disease, but the cure. And the lockdowns, the economic destruction that's taken place, people losing businesses. I saw a clip on Twitter of a guy, it was in Boston. He said he was really mad. He said, "I spent 25 years building a business, and I would rather take my chances with COVID than losing my business." I think that sentiment is spreading a lot more. We're seeing people defy government orders. We are seeing more and more people just gaffing off the government. And yet we're seeing more and more restrictions. And I noticed the dichotomy here in the United States. A lot of the blue state politicians and so-called leaders are really trying to hold this openings back and coming up with all kinds of weird and in many cases regulations that are at cross purposes. Like you can't, in Michigan, I think you can't have like more than 2 people in a canoe or a kayak or something like that. But if you drive your Tahoe to the lake with 4 people in it, that is okay, I think. I'm not sure. Stuff like that. So anyways, what concerned me was, we won't know the after effects of this until, many months or probably years afterwards. But I've been tracking as best I can, and it's anecdotal in many cases, but statistics are starting to come out about non-COVID related anxiety, depression, things that come from that. Um, and I just listed some here. California doctor has seen a year's worth of suicides in 4 weeks. More people died of suicide in a single Tennessee county last week than of the coronavirus across the entire state. Here's one: anxiety created by reactions to COVID, such as stay-at-home orders, business shutdowns, media exaggerations, and legitimate concerns about the virus, will destroy at least 7 times more years of human life than can possibly be saved by lockdowns to control the spread of the disease. J.P. Morgan came out with a paper. They suggest that the lockdown measures have not only resulted in economic devastation, but could have also resulted in more COVID-19 deaths. So, we've seen more and more of this. This has been my concern. And, you'll get the retort from people, well, this has worked because we flattened the curve and we didn't, well, but that was what the original intention was. We were just going to flatten the curve such that we didn't overwhelm hospitals. Well, we're past that. We're going into the summer months. I mean, I live down here in South Texas. It's over 100 degree heat index every day, and the UV index is huge. The virus can't survive outside in that. Why would you lock yourself in your house? Why aren't you outside getting vitamin D and fresh air? Now, we've lifted the lockdowns here in Texas. Things are getting back to normal, whatever how you want to define normal after you basically bring the economy to an all stop. But we still see in many states, Michigan, Illinois, California, Connecticut, all these places are blue states, New York, and we are seeing pushback by the populations. And it's interesting to note that recent elections, they had some California, Wisconsin, the Staunton, Virginia City Council, I think was Friday or yesterday. These were Democratic seats, and they've all flipped. Now, it may be anecdotal, it may be just coincidence, but it also may be people's frustration and annoyance with these, what they call Karens, and these people that are just blowing this thing totally out of proportion, which is my view. I don't believe the statistics. I don't believe this Fauci. This guy has an agenda. If you look back in his past, this guy's never been right about anything. And I think that, what we've seen is people panicking, even politicians. I've talked about this before. Somebody do something. So, of course, they're going to, they don't want to be blamed for anything or be blamed by the media or anybody by not locking everything down and being precautious. But I think the advice given was not good. Now, in the defense of some of these folks, this was a newer virus. They didn't really know what was going on because we had bogus information coming out of China. But it was pretty clear pretty quick that this wasn't going to be, like an Ebola outbreak. And we still haven't really lifted this thing. So that's the only thing I'm saying. I mean, I don't have big trust of government and statists and politicians. They're not, they are what they are. I think healthy skepticism is the best course of action. But, we don't know the effects of this thing still. And how is this actionable? Well, I mean, you're not going to recover immediately. Now the original thesis among many investment people and pundits and media, it's going to be a short lockdown and we'll bounce right back in a V-shaped recovery. No one's really saying that anymore. And so we don't know the devastation. It's going to take years to close the output gap that we've created now. We're blowing out the deficits in this country. The deficit's probably going to be $3.5 to $5 trillion. You're layering on debt. The Federal Reserve is printing money. If you watch Jay Powell's 60 Minutes interview a week or two ago, that's basically what he said they're doing. And, the masters of the universe, 1%, and Wall Street are getting rich off this. The special purpose vehicles are in effect. All the Sharpies loaded up on all those bonds before the Federal Reserve stepped in and bought them. And, hey, rinse and repeat. and you're sitting in your house cowering over the flu. So that's my take on things. I thought this was a little funny, interesting. These are some various health ministers from various jurisdictions. They don't appear to be very healthy, to be, but I don't know their personal, I don't have access to their personal medical records, but I think you got to be careful sometimes, who are you getting health advice from? What are the backgrounds? I found that, interesting that documentary Plandemic came out, and it had a lot to say about Mr. Fauci, Dr. Fauci, and some of his previous interactions with various other previous epidemics like HIV, and how people profit from these things. I thought it was interesting. But, yeah, not looking good there. So, back in 2000, this was kind of makes me wonder. One of the things that I'm really, when I look this stuff up, I remember the H1N1, and we didn't make a big deal out of it. We didn't shut the economy down. We didn't go nuts about it. And if you look at the CDC stats, they estimated that 151,000 to half a million people worldwide died from H1N1, the pandemic, in 2009. It was the first year that the virus circulated. That mostly were people under 60, and the reason was that people above 60 had probably had some antibodies related to some variation of previous H1N1 exposure. Now we're seeing in this COVID situation where people over 65 are more susceptible to this because of the comorbidities they may have. And younger people are more, I don't want to say immune, but are able to withstand it better. Now, yes, there's anecdotal evidence. People can send me a link. Oh, what about the mother and daughter that died within days of each other, or this 20-year-old person died, or but the statistics, the overall is that this attacks people with comorbidities, or people that are most at risk of dying, talking about COVID, are people with comorbidities and older people. But I don't recall the whole world being shut down over H1N1. The Worldometer currently shows 344,556 people died worldwide of COVID as of today. But as I suggested, I don't believe that every one of those deaths is attributable to COVID. A lot of those people died with COVID. They were sick with it, or they had been exposed to it, but they had other things that were causing it. If you have COPD, emphysema, severe diabetes, whatever, you probably died of that, or on your way to dying of that. And then you got this disease, and it just exacerbated your condition. How many of the people, that's why I say right here, how many of those people died with COVID and not from COVID? So I like this quotation from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, Sherlock Homes author, where he says, "It is a capital mistake to theorize before one has data. Insensibly, one begins to twist facts to suit theories instead of theories to suit facts." This is a bias, right? We've talked about biases before. And I may be biased against this too. I mean, you can go back and look at my previous video since this thing started. I never really, thought this was going to be a big deal. I still don't think it is in the big scheme of things. People running around with masks and all this nonsense. The best thing that could have happened is, I think, the Swedish model. Basically, live your life. Try to protect the most vulnerable people. I mean, not like Governor Cuomo, who took COVID patients and put them in nursing homes, and then the thing spreads like wildfire and kills everybody. Not decisions like that, but say, if you are an older person that's susceptible, then you should be quarantined. But people that are, other people should go about their business. They should acquire the disease, get over it, and then they have herd immunity. That's what the Swedes did, and they didn't have, their whole population die. Did they have possibly slightly more deaths? Well, we need to see the final statistics on it, but it doesn't appear it's too much difference. I certainly don't think you should sit in your house with no sunshine and fresh air, let your health deteriorate, sitting there chewing your fingernails with, how is that helpful? Worrying about what could happen. So I think the media has a lot of responsibility, which they're not going to take. I think a lot of politicians have a lot of responsibility, and I think there's going to be a backlash come November when like I said, I think we've started to see it already. So that's my views on this. It just goes back to my, having natural skepticism. And, maybe I'm biased against this just because of my skepticism of government, and maybe I'm off base. But when I compare the most other recent pandemic, H1N1, to this, I don't see a lot of difference except the age groups that were attacked or most susceptible to the disease, but the death rates are similar. And we didn't go nuts about it. No one even talks about H1N1. People forget about it. So moving on to some economic stats this week. I don't say correlations, causation. What we have here is a chart of, but I think this is interesting. We have the Bloomberg Consumer Comfort Index. It's in red, and then we have the S&P 500. The United States economy is 70% plus based on consumerism, consumer spending. And consumer spending is influenced a lot by, confidence and what people feel and emotions, right? If you feel flush, everything's going good at work, you're making good money, the stock market's going up, blah, blah, blah. Every day it's, looks better and better. You're going to be more apt to spend money. That's going to increase the economy. That should translate into higher earnings. You see how this progression goes. But now we're in a situation where we have, 35 million people not working. People are scared out of their wits about this. People are retrenching. They don't know. They're worried about the future. Their confidence is low. And so we see this Bloomberg Consumer Comfort Index basically crashing like we've never seen before, at least in the last 13 years. And we see the stock market, S&P, dropped initially in March and then it has bounced. I'm not sure that we haven't seen the lows. I'm not sure that we haven't seen, I just don't see how earnings are going to recover sufficiently to support the stock prices. We have the government stepped up and the Federal Reserve has stepped up to plug liquidity holes and to give people some sustenance, but it can't do that forever. And so I think, this initial liquidity crisis that we had has been mitigated to a certain extent with a lot of that money flowing into the stock market. But I think we're going to transition from a liquidity issues to solvency. I mean, I track the TSA checkpoint data, which you can check. It's online. They post it every day. And airline traffic is down still by around 90%. Is it going up? Yes, very slowly. People are returning. But, a company like Southwest, I think they said they're losing $30 million a day. How long can that continue? $30 million a day is, or maybe it was a week. I don't know. But that's a tremendous amount of money to lose day after day, week after week. And not good. Now, I think that if the media would get off this thing and just quit hyping it and just report facts, people would, it's just like 9/11. I mean, no one thinks about getting on a plane now thinking that a terrorist is going to get on there and crash it into some building in their downtown. I remember right after 9/11, they stopped all air travel. There wasn't any air travel for some period of time, and then you could get on planes and there'd be 5 people like there was now with coronavirus. Last time I flew, which was in late January, early February, for business, the planes were all packed. That's not how it is now, but you're thinking it eventually recovers. But how many of those airlines make it through? How many of them have to go through bankruptcy? Like I said, look at retail sales. Retail sales online are up over 70% from what I understand. But I think Macy's opened their stores, some of their stores, and their sales are down, 50%. So you can't stay in business. You can't stay in business as a restaurant or a low margin business that requires volume and only be operating at 25 or 50% capacity. That just doesn't work. So you see anecdotally these things, but confidence has really, really been punctured. People are pulling back. They're not spending money. They're not I just don't think I guess the bottom line is I just don't think we've seen the bottom here. I don't think we've seen this is a short covering rally or an initial bounce, but I think, with confidence down here, we're just going to see, another leg down at some point. I do think that we are going to see a resurgence of value in the type of companies that that I like to play in. Out of favor, and I put this chart up here. It's a calculation of the Russell Growth versus Russell Value Index, and we're seeing, at the tech bubble peak in 2008 or 2000, 2000. Sorry, we're seeing a similar peak here, and can this keep going higher? I don't know. I don't know, if Amazon, Facebook, and Google can power the entire market higher. Very possible. Who knows? But I think that the time is coming for a lot of the value stocks, a lot of the out of favor industries. I think we are going to see a sea change, and we are going to see a shift from an emphasis on growth, and because there's not going to be a lot of growth, more towards value. Wanted to throw this up there, and I have a lot of links. I have a lot of links to a lot of articles. There's a lot of information I'm putting out today, but I have a lot of articles that I got a lot of this information from. But this came from an article from I believe it was from the Energy Department, but it was talking about the case for a uranium reserve and why, there was an article written by the Assistant Secretary of Energy about this and why they're creating it in the thinking behind it. And this is really striking when you look at it. I like to put visuals up because they help you. I can just sit here and say, well, there's only less than 500,000 pounds of uranium were mined in the United States last year. But when you put this in context of the previous production, it's shocking. The United States gets around 20% of its electricity from nuclear power, but yet we only domestically produce, look at this, minuscule amounts of our own uranium. And that is, not to mention the fact that we have a nuclear navy, submarines, aircraft carriers, many of the cruisers are powered with nuclear power plants. It does not make sense from a national security point of view or a fuel security point of view that if we have domestic sources of uranium, why we don't try to build up a uranium reserve. I believe that over time, the globalism that was in place over the last post-World War II neoliberal era is now crumbling. There's going to be a resurgence of nationalism. There's going to be a resurgence of companies looking inward, getting most of your uranium from Russia, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan is probably not the best way to do business when you have 20% of your electricity being produced by nuclear power here in the United States. It's just not prudent. So I think, I don't know how this all plays out. What I'm just trying to tell you is this is shocking when you look at it, how low the production actually is of uranium production in the United States. Now, we don't have the lowest cost reserves. We don't have necessarily the best reserves, but there are reserves here, and they should be cultivated. And, building up a reserve, you can store yellow cake for long periods of time. It's not a problem, and I think that that's just a smart thing to do. If you took our entire nuclear power station fleet offline tomorrow, you'd be a problem taking 20% of the electricity we produce away in one, just shut it down. So it's a big deal. I think this isn't the main thesis behind the uranium trade that we're involved in. It's a longer trade. It's a longer supply-demand issue, continued growth in power. It was interesting, if you read this article that I'll link to that has this chart in it, you will note that last year was the best year for nuclear power production. The amount of terawatts that were produced from nuclear power plants just keeps growing not because necessarily new plants, but just efficiencies, putting bigger generators in, whatever they're doing in their plants to get more out of the existing plant and equipment. So that has been something that isn't really talked about, but does happen. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this week. I apologize. This may have just been jumping around a lot. This isn't probably the best video I've ever done, but um, you know, I'm still developing my thinking on a lot of things. We don't know what's going to happen. We can speculate, but we have to sit here and try to think this thing through. And I just see with the amount of damage that has been done to the world economy, I don't think we felt the full repercussions yet. So I wanted to talk about a few of these things. I want to get it in your head. I know some people aren't going to like it. Some people here, they just believe whatever the media and government says. Okay, you can take pot shots in the comments, knock yourself out. But I think you got to really separate yourself from that type of thinking, because these people, everybody has an agenda. Everybody has something they're working to. And I have found in my life, being around 53 years old, that very few people, when I'm dealing with them, are working for my benefit. So it's always got to be trust but verify, and then try to figure out, cui bono, who benefits. So not trying to be a conspiracy nut, but, I just can't figure out why we've wrecked the world economy for something that really wasn't anything worse than H1N1, or maybe is, slightly worse than a bad flu season. So I know many people don't agree with that sentiment, and that's fine, but they're probably still working and getting an income, and 30 to 35 million people aren't. So that will be a problem. If that's going to take years to rectify. Now, people, I've talked to many people that have just been thrown out of work. I mean, with the oil price crash, many people have lost their jobs, and they won't be getting them back. They're going to have to reinvent themselves. And I'm a guy that's, if you're over 50, you think about that. How do you reinvent yourself if you're 55 and you were counting on finishing your career over the next 5 to 7 years, and you're just thrown out of work and you have no prospects? So something to think about. I will say, as a parting one thing I will put a link to, I was interviewed yesterday by a guy named, I think it pronounced his name, Maris Skoznitsky. We talked about the tanker trade. We talked about the investment philosophy. I talked about one of the holdings in the newsletter that I'm pretty bullish on. You may want to check that out. I dropped a bone in there for listeners. But I'll put a link to that if you're interested. I mean, most of you guys listen. I babble on enough. I don't know if you want to listen to another 40 minutes of me babbling on, but I thought it was a pretty good interview. He did a good job. And you should check out his channel. He has a lot of good interviews. He recently interviewed Robert Bugbee from Scorpio Tankers, which I thought was a pretty good interview also. So I'll put a link to that. So that's it for this week, guys. Appreciate the support. Thanks for subscribing. If you want to help me out, if you enjoy these videos, you can become a Patreon. Have a link to that. You can take a subscription to the newsletter. If you just commenting, sharing the videos, liking them, that helps me out too with the algorithm over here at YouTube. So thanks a lot, guys, and appreciate the support. Talk to you next week.